Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Wilson Center. Happy New Year to those whom we haven't seen since this auspicious occasion. I'm Ambassador Phil Rieker. I chair the Global Europe program here at the Wilson Center, and it's such an honor to be here today as we honor Senator Ben Cardin. I'm really deeply honored to represent Wilson's Global Europe program for this opportunity to recognize a remarkable career and an enduring legacy, that of Senator Ben Cardin, who's been a tireless advocate for human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Under the leadership of Director Robin Quinville and with Jason Moyer and Masha Ovchik and guidance from Baroness Cathy Ashton and our distinguished global fellows and dedicated interns, the Global Europe program focuses on how Europe approaches and engages on critical global issues. In that regard, of course, we work closely with our colleagues in the Kennan Institute here at Wilson to examine Europe's relations with Russia and Eurasia, and also the nexus with China, the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East, and Africa, and indeed with the Western Hemisphere and the United States. Our initiatives include Ukraine in Europe, examining what it will take to make Ukraine's European future a reality. What we call Enterprise Europe looks at Europe's energy security, transatlantic trade, and the challenges to democracy. And we look closely at the role of NATO, the European Union, and the future of the OSCE. So we're honored to celebrate Senator Ben Cardin from Maryland and his long career in advancing human rights, multilateralism, and transatlantic cooperation, because of his truly unwavering commitment to the principles of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, the OSCE is an organization that doesn't get enough credit for its role in conflict management among its 56 participating states and indeed around the world. I often get bewildered looks when I mention the OSCE. Yes, it does still exist. In fact, it's the largest multilateral security forum in the world, with members from North America, from Europe, and Central Asia. Continued US support for the OSCE, which has broad bipartisan support, just like the Wilson Center, is anchored by the Congress. Wilson, in fact, is the US representative to the official OSCE think tank network. Now, during his 38 years in Congress as both a senator and earlier as a member of the House of Representatives, Senator Cardin served for 32 years on the Bipartisan Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, also known as the Helsinki Commission. Now, as chairman of the US Helsinki Commission during the 111th and 113th Congresses, I hope I've got that right, he has upheld the values enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act. This year is the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. It's a momentous milestone. The Helsinki Final Act is a landmark document of Cold War-era détente, and it was the first time the then Soviet Union acknowledged human rights as a core pillar of security. This human dimension, which continues this day through the work of the OSCE, is one of the three baskets of activities along with the political, military, and economic dimensions. I'm often asked, what role will the OSCE play moving forward? Well, in any post-conflict scenario for Ukraine, as one example, the OSCE will play a role in maintaining borders, overseeing elections, and ensuring a potential ceasefire is maintained. As I always say, if the OSCE didn't already exist, we'd need to create it. In the face of increasingly challenged security environment in Europe again today, we need this organization. We need to support it. And as the steward of the Helsinki Commission for decades, we have to thank Senator Cardin for his continued commitment to this vital international organization and its mission to bridge divides and foster mutual understanding. Senator Cardin has championed these principles, reminding us that they are not just aspirational, but essential to building a more just and peaceful world. Now, as we honor Senator Cardin, we also reflect on the example he has set. As many of my Foreign Service colleagues I've been a resident of the great state of Maryland at times and have family still living there. And in the great traditions of American democracy, this is a season of confirmation hearings. I recall my own confirmation as the US Ambassador to North Macedonia, now more years ago than I care to count. And I believe the Ambassador for North Macedonia may be joining us today among the many other ambassadors and distinguished guests with us. But chairing that hearing, I might add, Senator Cardin was one of the few to ask me a question. And he allowed me, by helping confirm me, the privilege to serve as a United States ambassador. So thank you, Senator Cardin, for your service, your leadership, and your enduring commitment to making this world a better place. The courage, the integrity, the relentless dedication to the ideals of democracy and human rights that Senator Cardin has personified is not marking an end of an era with his departure from public office. These contributions will continue, I think, to inspire us to advance the vision of a world grounded in values, the values of the Helsinki Final Act. And that is a very appropriate segue to our president and CEO here at Wilson, Ambassador Mark Green. Many of you know Ambassador Green, who previously served as administrator of the US Agency for International Development from 2017 to 2020. Earlier, he served as president of the International Republican Institute, one of the world's leading democracy promotion organizations. He served as US Ambassador to Tanzania from mid-2007 to early 2009, and served 4 terms in the US House of Representatives, representing another great state, Wisconsin, and its 8th district. He served as executive director of the McCain Institute, president of the Initiative for Global Development, and senior director at the US Global Leadership Coalition. Most importantly for us, Ambassador Mark Green has been president and CEO of the Wilson Center since 2021, so it's my privilege to call to the stage Ambassador Green to continue with today's program. Thank you.
So you can tell Phil knows how to survive confirmation hearings because it's the great state of Maryland and the great state of Wisconsin. Well done. Phil, thanks for those kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, as you got from Phil's remarks, coming together to honor Senator Cardin allows us to honor many people and many things and many principles. The 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act and its role it played in defining Europe's post-war international system, the essential role of the Helsinki Commission in our nation's commitment to international human rights, and of course the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Wilson Center's oldest program, the Kennan Institute. The Kennan Institute was established to help ensure that America could continue to develop the kind of deep academic expertise that led its co-founder, Ambassador George F. Kennan, from the great state of Wisconsin, just getting that in, to conceive of the containment policy set out in his famous long telegram. Yet Kennan's most important lesson for today isn't found in his telegram or any of other writings that he put forward. I think Kennan's real lesson, and that of the Institute's co-founders, James Billington and Frederick Starr, is that bringing informed scholarship to the policy process, regardless of the era, regardless of the challenges we face, is essential to advancing our nation's best interests. That lesson has guided the Kennan Institute since its founding 5 decades ago, and it will continue to guide it for 5 decades to come. We will benefit from the steady approach as we inevitably move towards a post-war peace in Ukraine and a post-Putin future in Russia. I would contend that the words of President Wilson inscribed in the memorial hallway downstairs, that those who founded the Kennan Institute and those leaders who established the Helsinki Commission down the street were engaged in something of a, his words, common enterprise. Both enterprises are efforts, valiant efforts to sustain our nation's leadership, to build our capacity to confront Moscow's challenges to peace and order, whether those challenges come from Soviet aggression or Putin's resurgent imperialism. Now, in my time as a public servant, I've had the honor of working with Senator Cardin. And I can tell you firsthand, he is a man of principle. He has stood up for human rights across the globe, especially, of course, through his work on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. As Phil referenced, Senator Cardin has represented the people of Maryland for 20 years in the Maryland General Assembly, 20 years in the House of Representatives, and 18 years in what my former colleagues in the House refer to as the smaller House, the US Senate, for a total of 58 consecutive years serving the state and serving our nation. He's the author of the Magnitsky Rule of Law Accountability Act, a strong advocate for the Berlin Declaration, which recognized anti-Semitism for what it is, a threat to democracy, a threat to human rights, and a threat to the security of the OSCE region and beyond. As we recognize International Holocaust Remembrance Day and the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, it's also worth noting that Senator Cardin's grandparents immigrated here from Russia at the turn of the last century, and his family was deeply involved in the cause of getting Soviet Jews out of the Soviet Union. In his farewell address in the Senate, Senator Cardin stated, "Leading globally against human trafficking and corruption is America's value-based foreign policy at its very finest. America's strength is in our values, and we need to lead globally with our strength." Thanks to people like Senator Cardin, America has been able to showcase and lead globally in line with American values. And so it is with great pleasure that we assemble here to recognize Senator Ben Cardin with the George F. Kennan Leadership Award for his decades of public service and his long-standing leadership in foreign policy. Senator Cardin. Well, the real test of his fitness is whether or not he's able to.
Okay, we got the photos out.
Yeah, there we go.
Succeeded in that. Mark, you didn't talk about your confirmation hearing.
Yeah.
It didn't go quite as smoothly as Ambassador Rieker's did, but hey, you did well. You got it confirmed. First of all, thank you so much. It really is a pleasure to be here. Myrna and I really appreciate this opportunity, and thank you for the recognition. I appreciate that very much. The Wilson Center is one of my favorite groups. It's a nonpartisan organization that provides information and counsels us on global engagement to Congress and to many of the important policy institutions. We need you more now than ever before. So let me just go back a little bit. Mark sent me this invitation in October, and I was very flattered to receive it. And I said, gee, getting this invitation from Ambassador Green is a perfect opportunity for me to talk about, as Mark said, value-based foreign policy, because Mark really has exemplified that throughout his career as a member of Congress, as an ambassador, USAID, the McCain Center, and here at the Wilson Center. You have really demonstrated the importance of America leading by its strength on value-based foreign policy. So I said, this is going to be a perfect opportunity. We can take a victory lap on what we've been able to do and be optimistic about America's future because we're really in a pretty good position. And I was optimistic about the elections. And I wrote down a lot of notes about what I was going to say here today. And then the November elections occurred. So I had to throw out all my notes, start all over again, because that's obviously changed the whole situation here. Because it is a real challenge whether America will be able to continue to lead with its strength and its values. So let me just back up a little bit and talk a little bit about America's strength and what we've been able to do over so many years. We're talking about principally the Ukraine struggle, at least initially. Ukraine really represented the challenge of our generation. We saw that the world was dividing between democratic and autocratic states. We saw an unholy alliance developing, maybe not formally, but close to formally, between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. We saw how autocratic leaders rule through transactional politics, what they can get in the moment. They are fueled by corruption, and they enforce their will by use of force. Ukraine being a prime example of Russia's autocratic way of saying that we're going to change the borders of Europe through force. And then there's the United States that says, no, we believe in a different type of a world, a different type of foreign policy, one that's based upon values. Democratic principles, yes, respect for human rights, anti-corruption, opportunity, respect for country's sovereignty. That's all part of what we believe in and we've led with over so many years. And we look at Ukraine as the front line of that definition. And that's why it was critically important for the United States to lead a global coalition to help the Ukrainians defend against Russia's aggression. And quite frankly, we've been more successful than we thought we were going to be. I think most of us thought that within weeks or months, Ukraine would fall. But instead, the Ukrainian people, their spirit for democracy and freedom prevailed with the help of the United States and our allies. And today, Ukraine has a future. But that future is still not defined. And the question is whether there'll be the continued support that Ukraine needs. Because Ukraine must win this war. Now, there'll be different definitions of winning. But right now, winning this war is allowing Ukraine to determine how it can negotiate with Russia the next plateau on its terms, not Russia's terms. That's what winning is all about. Now, Russia will define it differently. We know that. But the international community will know who won the battle. And we have to make sure that we win that battle. And that's why this is really the defining issue of our times. Now, Mark mentioned the Magnitsky sanctions and the Magnitsky laws and all the things that we've done. And I just want to talk a little bit about this because America's leadership has been so instrumental in the development of the world that we live in. Going back to the Marshall Plan after World War II, it was our belief, and rightly so, that if we help build a more prosperous Europe, a Europe that has opportunity, that Europe has the seeds for democratic states, that it would be the right thing for America to do because of who we are, but it would also be in our national security interests, a safer world. And were we right about that? Right on. So when we lead with our values, we're going to come out ahead. President Biden said that we're going to lead with our values, and he did. This past month, we celebrated Jimmy Carter, who taught us that you can be a good guy, you have high integrity, you can do what's right, you can promote American values, and you become President of the United States. I thought the contrast between Jimmy Carter and January the 20th was pretty clear. And it was a hope for all of us that we have hope for our future. So I was engaged in the Magnitsky issues, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it was an interesting battle because it didn't come easily. It started in 2007 when Sergei Magnitsky, a lawyer representing a client, discovered fraud in tax fraud and embezzlement by government officials. He reported it as any lawyer is required to do. As a result of reporting that corruption, he was arrested, tortured, and killed. I was chair of the Helsinki Commission at that time and a freshman member of the United States Senate. And I took up the cause in the commission. And we were able to pass the Sergei Magnitsky Accountability Act in 2012, later made it global. We were able to do that because we were leading with our values. So as I became chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and as chair of the Helsinki Commission, my priority was to promote American foreign policy based upon values. And I'm very pleased that working with Secretary of State Blinken, we were able to pass the Countering Global Corruption Act in the last Congress, in which we were finally able to put a priority focus on anti-corruption policies within the State Department. You see, the State Department, I love them. Even the administrator of USAID, I love them. Good people. But they become a little bit too narrowly focused on accomplishing their mission and don't look sometimes at the broader picture of what we need to do. And that was clear to me in regards to our missions around the world focus on anti-corruption. They had so many things on their plate, they just couldn't seem to find the time to make that a priority. And as President Biden said, corruption is a core national security interest. It's the fuel for autocratic regimes. So with Secretary Blinken's help, and the fact that I held the gavel of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee helped a little bit as well, we were able to get a bill passed that requires every mission around the world to focus on anti-corruption in the country in which they're representing America. And it's the first step similar to another policy that we adopted that comes under our value-based foreign policy, the trafficking in persons reports that we do and the anti-human trafficking, which, by the way, came out of the Helsinki Commission. It started there with hearings, because the Helsinki Commission we have three buckets here. We have economics and environment, we have security, and then we have human rights. But it's best known for human rights. That basket gets the most attention. And we took up human trafficking. And we took up the Magnitsky type issues. And we were able to get something done. And once America leads, other countries follow. The Trafficking in Persons report now is widely accepted. But there's consequences if a country is not doing the right thing. It can be a transit country. It can be an origin country or a destination country. But if they're not doing the right thing, they are penalized. There may be trade sanctions. There may be other consequences to that. We used a similar model for corruption, that if a country is not doing what it needs to do, there will be consequences to those areas. So that's some of the things we were able to get done. So I just really want to give a shout out to the challenges that we're facing today. I must tell you, has me gravely concerned. I think Donald Trump is transactional, not value person. I think he looks at the immediate transactional needs and does not look at the values in which that may unleash. So we're going to have challenges, but never give up hope. We got people in this room that have literally sacrificed their lives in order to advance American policy. Our two ambassadors here had to go through congressional hearings. They deserve a round of applause for putting up with that. We have, I think Kyle Parker was on the prohibited list to Russia before anyone else was. And the problem is he's still well known by the Russians today. That's courage. We got human rights defenders that put their lives on the line every day of the week. Vladimir Kara-Murza, one of my friends, who was poisoned twice by Russia, but still there, carrying out the mission of freedom for the Russian people. What a hero. I remember holding a vigil for him in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And someone said, "Why are you doing that? It's not going to make any difference." A few weeks or months later, he was freed. And he was back in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as a free person, so we could celebrate his freedom. It makes a difference. Don't ever give up hope. I understand things are tough today. They really are tough. And I don't know what's going to happen with some of the policies the president has announced. For you see, America's strength is in its engagement. If we're not engaged, believe me, other countries will be, including China. We have tremendous challenges that are out there. China's a threat. There's no question. China's looking at what's happening in Ukraine as to what they're going to do in Taiwan. So we have to recognize that. We have real threats that are out there. But there's also opportunities that are out there. Syria, recently falling, gives us a chance for a more reasonable government for the people of Syria. The Middle East, with a ceasefire, gives us a chance for an off-ramp. There's real interest among the Arab partners that we have for a regional security pact with Israel and normalization of the relations, particularly between the Saudis and the Israelis, that could lead to a regional security pact that isolates Iran. That would be in America's national security interest. These potentials are out there today. So don't give up hope. Myrna and I visited Berlin in 1987. We'll never forget that visit. We went through Checkpoint Charlie and couldn't believe that this existed in our lifetime. We met with East Berliners, and we were their eyes and ears and voice during that period of time in the free world. We returned a few years later, hammer in hand, to knock down the Berlin Wall. I got a piece of it in my office today. And we've been back several times to see the unified city of Berlin. You make a difference. What we do makes a difference. We can never give up hope. We could always be there because we can always make a change. So the secret for success is the fact that we've had bipartisan support. The Wilson Center is nonpartisan bipartisan. We need that bipartisan support. I like Mark Green, even though he's a Republican. I like him. John McCain helped me get the Magnitsky bill done. Roger Wickers helped me with the permanent Magnitsky law. These are Republicans, in case you didn't know. John McCain was a Republican, for those. I'm a Democrat, for those who may not know. You can get things done if you work together, an opportunity. I am optimistic that we'll stay with Ukraine and make sure they win this war. I am optimistic about that. I really am. I'm optimistic that we'll find a path for reasonable development in the Middle East. But I'll tell you what worries me more as far as regional conflicts. Will there be the voice for the people of Sudan? It doesn't get the headlines like Ukraine and the Middle East. But the atrocities being committed there are horrible. Will we still have bandwidth to help in Sudan? What's going to happen in Haiti? Not a lot of attention to Haiti. That's one of our neighbors. They need our attention. They need our spotlight. What's going to happen in Venezuela? We're just going to roll over and allow the fake election to, against the people? What's going to happen with the brave people like Machado? Is she going to be safe or not? It depends upon us. So I guess my hope is that the Wilson Center and the people in this room recognize that your activism is more important today than it was before the November elections. It's more important that we stand up for America and stand up for America's values, which is its strength. And if we do that, we can make a difference. We can make this world a better place, which is in our DNA, a safer place, a place in which America will be stronger, as well as our international partners. We can build a stronger NATO alliance. We can be engaged with our partners in Asia-Pacific areas, as we are now with several alliances. We can build on those and build a better world. That's where I think the challenge of our time lies. And we all have to stay actively engaged. We cannot be despondent because of what we read in the papers about President Trump's most recent executive order. Let's hope there's the courage in Congress. After all, Congress is the Article I entity in the Constitution. Let's hope that they'll stand up for America's values. And let's have confidence in Article III. And let us have confidence that the President will find his way in a way that will not damage our country and will allow America to continue to be the great democratic state that it is. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator. All right. Well, Good to know there's one optimistic man in the room. You know, it's counter-conventional wisdom, so I think everybody here appreciates a bracing whiff of the positive, although they would note that, you know, maybe it looks more positive when you don't have to sit through the hearings anymore.
Yes, I was asked that question, do I miss the battles in Washington like being in a confirmation hearing? And yes, I miss it for about a couple minutes, and then I'm very happy I'm not there.
Well, we are all you today in saying that. Senator, I really appreciate this, and, you know, congratulations. This is a great honor. I thought it would be helpful and interesting for people to unpack a little bit more, you know, your thoughts about the role of Congress in our foreign policy going forward. Of course, there's lots of Russia hands in this room who want to talk a little bit more about your record there, since this is the Kennan Institute and the Kennan Award. But let's start with Congress. And I'm interested in, you know, if you were sitting back there as the leader of the Democrats on the House Foreign Relations Committee today, you know, they're looking at not just a lot of nominations that are hard to swallow, although an outpost of bipartisanship on the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, but they're looking at the appointments, they're looking at the president's executive orders, they're looking at the rhetoric coming out of the White House when it comes to America's place in the world, when it comes to our neighbors. Doesn't seem to be the most friendly surround sound. What would you say to your Senate Democratic caucus in the Foreign Relations Committee if you guys were sitting down and having a strategy session right now? Like, what's the way to counter that for you effectively?
Well, let me talk foreign policy, because I think that's our main focus here today.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I mean on foreign policy.
Let me start on foreign policy and start with the fact that go back to my efforts on the Magnitsky Law. President Obama was president of the United States. He opposed my bill. He opposed it because the executive branch does not like Congress getting engaged. There's a lot of interest in the United States Senate and in the House on human rights. The new Secretary of State has a strong record on human rights. So I think alliances can be formed between Democrats and Republicans on the human rights front. I was successful because I had Republican partners to my bill. I was also successful because I found a way to leverage the passage of that bill with must-pass legislation and being able to find a way to get that done. That's strategy, but the strategy was worked in conjunction with Republicans. So I guess my first point is that it's not unusual to have disagreements between Congress and the White House on foreign policy. Now, foreign policy is primarily determined by the executive branch. We recognize that. It's hard for 535 members to speak with a single voice. We recognize that on trade, where we had the constitutional authorities that we've delegated to the executive branch. But we can speak on foreign policy when we can come together. So my message to my Democratic colleagues, build those alliances with Republicans on the committee early, get the areas that you want to move forward with, and on human rights, there are numerous areas. China's ripe. There's so many issues that we can move in regards to China. It's also, Russia is also easy for us to move with. Iran, of course, is overly easy to move on. But there's a lot of areas that we can move, and we can set up the policy and override the executive branch that may be more transactional and willing to forego some of the human rights issues. Going back to President Obama and Magnitsky, President Obama did not want to alienate Russia because of the reset policies that he wanted to do with Russia during his first term. We said, you can still talk to Russia, but you have to do it within the context of human rights. We were able to get that done. Go back to the first term of the Trump administration. We were able to pass legislation that that narrowed what President Trump could do in removing sanctions against Russia.
Yeah, I was going to bring up this question. It's a great example, actually, of, it was Republicans, right? And at the time, Mitch McConnell was the leader. Now he's said that he will dedicate himself as not the leader to, seeking to shore up support for Ukraine. Do you think there's still support on the Hill among your Republican colleagues for that kind of a strategy?
It is, but the advice is you got to move on it. You can't just wait and be reactionary. If you're reactionary, the president has the advantage because no one likes to go against, the Republicans don't want to go against the president. But if we initiate and the president is not excited about what we're doing, it's a different story. You can win those battles. And again, there's so many must-pass bills. The National Defense Authorization Bill, the Reconciliation Bill. There's a lot of bills that are going to be passed that you can put these provisions in, and the administration is going to be busy on other things. We can get some progress made. So my advice is get those agendas moving early. We left off, the human rights defenders is a good example. We did not get that to the finish line. It passed the committee. We couldn't get it to the finish line. That's an area that we could really move forward on. So there's a lot of areas that I think we can move forward on. But you got to move quickly and get the alliances set up, have cordial relations between the Republicans and their leaders on the committees and on the floor and the Democrats, and you can get things done.
Well, again, I think the optimism is a good note to strike right now. I also noted that you had a certain amount of optimism that there would be a kind of a viable, at least, possibility for peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. Tell us what you think that looks like over the next year. How does that play out?
Well, there will be a time where Russia and Ukraine will enter into peace negotiations. It's going to happen at some point. I think both Russia and Ukraine want it to happen. But Ukraine has a pretty simple formula. They want to make sure that their boundaries are secure, not by a paper that says they're secure, but by an alliance that will enforce any violations of their sovereignty. They would like to be members of NATO, but something similar to that's going to have to be in the cards. So there's not just another paper that Russia can violate. And that there's got to be a recognition that the sovereignty of Ukraine has been preserved. There has to be protection for communities. And quite frankly, I think there has to be accountability. Now, we've already worked on some of the accountability provisions by the assets of Russia being held. So there's got to be some accountability as part of that. And if we can get that, I think that's what, I think President Zelensky is reasonable about this. He recognizes that it's not going to be as it was 20 years ago. There's going to be some changes in Russia and Ukraine. He recognizes that. But he also recognizes there has to be the protection of the sovereignty of Ukraine. You can't change borders because of force.
Do you see that your Republican former colleagues on the Hill are still willing to support Ukraine militarily? There's a real question now that it's obvious it's not, going to happen in 24 hours. There's a real live question, I think, in Washington, and debate even among Republicans about the best way, actually, to move forward in pursuing President Trump's goal of getting Putin to the table. What's your assessment, just as a matter of vote counting? I mean, the numbers went down. Senator Rubio notably did not vote in favor even of the last package for Ukraine aid. Is that a condition, basically, of being a Trump supporter in this day and age?
So let me put this in context. I've been in so many meetings with Ukrainians, some under the Helsinki Commission, some under Foreign Relations, some in America, some in Europe, with many, many Republicans, and almost to a person, we all say that we're 100% with Ukraine and we're going to give them everything they need and you can count on America. And then we go back to Congress and there's a vote up that they vote against because they say it's not Ukraine, it's the way that it's packaged in it. So I think there's strong bipartisan support for military assistance to Ukraine, strong bipartisan support. I think the Republicans and Democrats want to make it happen. But it's going to be a challenge because of the makeup of the House and the presidential politics, all that's going to make it much more challenging for us to be a reliable partner to Ukraine. Now, good news is that steps were taken by Congress and the White House in the last administration to shore up the supplies, the ways that we supply Ukraine with military assistance. It's not just traditional arms. There's a lot of other ways that we're helping. Just recently, Israel just transferred some the Patriot missiles. So there's different things that are happening through diplomacy that are making that possible. So I think the budget's going to be tough because we know that they're going to come in with real significant cuts in assistance programs. So it's going to be a challenge because of the budget and because of the way that these bills are packaged. But I do think, particularly with the Republicans now responsible because they have the control of the Senate as well as the House, to make sure at the end of the day Ukraine gets what it needs.
So, you, over your course of your time in Congress, in both the House and the Senate, the vision of what a legislator is has changed an awful lot. I was really struck in your remarks that you're talking about legislation that you passed in the Magnitsky Act and, the bills you were working on right up until the end of your tenure. The biggest difference, right, is that Congress no longer passes so many bills. But I'm curious, tell us a little bit about, the evolution in Congress's thinking about its role in foreign policy. This seems very relevant to me on the question of security assistance, for example, when you have a new administration that's asserted the view that basically we won't spend any money that we don't agree with. And, arguably that was at the core of the first impeachment of President Trump back in 2019. We all remember about Ukraine, but really it's a very similar theory of the case to the memo that we saw this week, which was essentially, okay, well, Congress may have appropriated this money, but, we don't have to spend it if we don't agree. Tell me about that and the view of that.
Well, Congress has ceded a lot of its power because of the way we act.
Yeah.
We don't pass bills, you're right. We do pass omnibus bills. So we should be passing a State Department authorization bill.
When was the last time one of those got through?
Well, they get through, but they're in the National Defense Authorization Act, so it's buried and it doesn't get the attention and doesn't have the opportunities that you would normally have in it. If we had a separate State Department reauthorization bill like we have a separate National Defense Authorization Act, then we could be talking as a collective group as to what our policies should be in Syria, or what our policies should be in the Middle East, what our policies should be in our own hemisphere. We'd have an opportunity to talk about that, as we do in the National Defense Authorization Act on the military side. They do get that opportunity. Our military armaments issues are debated openly by members of Congress. And it's pretty political, but those decisions are made in the legislative branch of government. We're not making those decisions on the State Department because we don't get enough done in the authorization process. So my advice, and I told this to Senator Risch and Senator Shaheen, my strong advice is to get the leadership commitment to bring out a State Department authorization bill and get it on the floor. And have fun doing it. I mean, I know you'll lose some votes. One of the things that really drive me just very disappointed, you don't have to win every vote on the floor. We don't on the National Defense Authorization win every vote on the floor. But we need to have votes. And our leaders have protected the members from votes, which is ridiculous. Why do we get members are worried they're going to lose an election on votes? Well, I've cast about 50,000 votes in my career. You can find many votes to run a 30-second ad against me. That's not going to be hard at all. You don't even do a lot of research on that. So I think members are just overly concerned about individual votes, where we should be doing that more. And if we did that, then Congress would have much more power than it has today. It cedes too much to the executive branch. If we had reauthorized a lot of these domestic programs where the president is issuing these executive orders today, right. If we had legislative policy on that, he couldn't do it. But we haven't reauthorized these bills. PEPFAR is not reauthorized. Yeah. I mean, reauthorized for what, a year? What, I don't know what the final bill was. Can somebody help me? Did we get 1 year?
I think 1 year.
We got 1 year on PEPFAR, which is ridiculous. Yeah. That's now the president can do what he wants to with the PEPFAR program, as we see he's threatening to do right now. If we had a 5-year reauthorization, we at least, Congress needs to act.
Well, that is a really interesting argument. I often hear kind of structural arguments about why Congress has, gotten ceded power in recent years. But I think this idea that there's not enough votes, that there's not enough legislation on the floor, that's a really interesting contribution to the debate. Now, tell us a little bit, I know we have limited time, but let's go back to Russia and foreign policy before we finish up, because your experience is so unique in passing the Magnitsky Act, as you pointed out, over the opposition from inside the Obama administration, your own party, as well as from some Republicans. What surprised you about, what worked and what didn't work with that as a technique? Sanctions have become increasingly the sort of tool of choice for policymakers. Tell us a little bit about how you feel about sanctions today.
Sanctions is a tool. It's a tool in our toolkit that is far preferable than sending military into a war and things like that. I mean, it's an option. Ideally, it's used for leverage and change. When we adopt sanctions, they're meant to be temporary. They're not meant to be permanent. They're meant to change behavior. And in some cases, they've worked. But in most cases, we've kept these sanctions on too long. Cuba is a good example. Cuba, the sanctions that went on Cuba were not really for change. It was mainly punitive against and politically motivated. So the Cuba sanctions are just not in line. The Russia sanctions were there for a particular purpose, and it hurt Russia. Mm-hmm. It hurts Russia to this day. When America leads, the world follows. When we passed Magnitsky, we were alone. Now, it's the golden standard around the world. So many countries, and it's effective. The difference between Magnitsky is that these are personal sanctions. Personal sanctions really bother people. It was the first issue brought up in the summit between President Putin and President Trump. Mm-hmm. Oligarchs do not like to be told they can't come to America and they can't trade in dollars. So it's personal. It's also helped, by the way, the industry here, because we have now a lot of lawyers making big fees trying to get people off the Magnitsky list. So
now I assume you're on the Russia ban list as a result of
I was on the Russia ban list with Kyle way back when. When we first started this, the original list was known in Russia as the Cardin list of those that were thought to be on those who tortured Magnitsky. It was not. We never published the Magnitsky list.
Right, I remember.
But they published them in Russia, and it was called the Cardin list at that time. So at that time, I would not dare go back into Russia. Even if they let me into Russia, I was not going. I'm not as brave as Karamurza. I don't want to get poisoned and killed. So.
Well, as a fellow member on the list, I'm not sure why I deserved
congratulations.
deserve the honor. But look, it is an interesting question, though. Do you think, as you look back on, it's really a tragedy, obviously, what's happened. Putin came to power 25 years ago, and there are so many steps along the way, right? First there's Georgia, then there's 2014. Were there moments as you look back where, perhaps if we had imposed tougher sanctions or done more, or do you believe it was inevitable that he would end up doing this?
No. There's times that I think we've missed opportunities to put stronger pressure on different players in different countries. What I said earlier, when America leads, other countries will follow. If we don't lead, other countries aren't going to do what's necessary. The best example of that are Russian assets being used for Ukraine. That was one of the best bills we passed. I got a lot of flack because I held it up till we passed it in the right form. But we passed it in the right form that got Europe to act with us.
Although they're still not agreeing to actually take the money, right, and give it to Ukraine.
Not yet, but they're at least using the proceeds. And there's some talk now with the European capitals about going to the next step. And I think it's, quite frankly, envisioned that it could be very much part of the talks between Russia and Ukraine at the end of the day, that these assets provide a wherewithal to deal with some of the accountability. So I think it's in play. And at least initially, Europe didn't want to do anything on this. Europe didn't want to do anything really on Russia's sanctions initially because it hurts them more than it hurts us on their economy. But because we led and because what we did, Russia, Europe had to follow. We had strong support from the Baltics and from Poland and countries that felt that they were very vulnerable to Ukraine, attacked by Russia. So, but we had some support in it. But by and large, Europe has not been helpful to us on Russian sanctions until now.
Well, it's going to be a whole new world of the United States dealing with Europe. It looks like many Europeans can't even get their phone calls returned so far in the new White House. Do you have any advice for them?
You know, it's hard to believe. It's been, what, 1 week?
I know. It's been a long week,
2
right?
days, 9 days.
Are you in
Look,
favor of buying Greenland?
I don't know why you think I'm optimistic. You're calling me optimistic. I'm really concerned. At best, there's going to be a lot of damage done to America. That's at best. Do I think we're going to survive and be a strong democratic state in 4 years from now? Yes, I do think we will. So I am optimistic about America's future. But make no mistake about it, I saw the damage during Trump won. I saw how hard it was. I went to Europe many times during Trump won. I was at several of the COP meetings during I met with Europeans. And my advice to my colleagues is go back to Europe, go back to Asia, go all around the world today to tell them America is not, that Donald Trump doesn't represent America. There's different views in this country. So you give them hope that we'll return. Because the challenge today is that you have a lot of countries in the Middle East, in Africa, in our own hemisphere, that have to make some decisions. Is America going to be, Europe also, a reliable partner or not? And if it's not going to be there when we need them, we better start looking at China. So that's the worry that we have. And so I'm not as optimistic as you painted me to be. I do believe our country will survive. I do believe America will be the strongest democratic power in the world at the end of the Trump administration. But I think we'll pay a heavy price unless Donald Trump changes some of his rhetoric and some of his actions. These tariffs could be devastating. And the way he's using these tariffs to try to intimidate countries, that's not what a great power does. I go through the whole list of everything he's doing.
Senator Cardin, forgive me for the sin of grasping onto optimism wherever we find it, but I really do appreciate your remarks today.
No, I'm not going to let you end on a downer. I mean,
No, that's a positive.
no, it's a challenge to the people in this room.
That's right.
I mean, recognize that if human rights defenders can be active in countries where their life is at risk when they just open up their mouth against their government, then surely we should not be intimidated by the rhetoric we hear from our president as to our activism and the way that we can get engaged to do what we think is right. And we need to find willing partners and then find a strategy that can work. And that strategy has to be calculated to the politics of America. And that's our challenge, and that we have to figure that out. We got to figure it out quickly.
Senator Cardin, it's really been an honor to speak with you, and congratulations on this award and for all of your service to the country. We're all, I'm sure, grateful for you spending time with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susan, for moderating today's conversation. Let me add my congratulations to Senator Cardin for today's richly deserved recognition and for decades of service advocating for and defending our highest ideas in international human rights. Although I've only recently been named director of the Kennan Institute, I've had the privilege of working with this storied institution as chair of its advisory council, as a speaker here in several cities as part of Kennan Conversations, and as a contributor to the program's publications. I may be new, but I know well this institute's missions and traditions. And we are now entering the very beginning of the first 100 days of a new administration. Much is changing in the international scene and American foreign policy. There's true potential for positive change in many areas. As we follow that path of change, we should take a moment like today to reflect on the principles that got the United States to where it is, a world leader in military affairs, in diplomacy, and in cultural influence. The 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Accords marks a pivotal moment in the story of our international leadership. As a historian of the Soviet Union, I know that the leaders of the Soviet Union felt that they had a real coup in Helsinki, international recognition for the borders the Soviets had expanded during the Second World War. Yet by signing an international treaty committing them to a human rights agenda that, after all, was there in their own constitution, they had started to chip away at the legitimacy of their own rule at home. This they would learn over time. As Ambassador Green has already mentioned, the 50th anniversary of the Kennan Institute reminds us that our leaders' ability to formulate wise international policy like Helsinki, or the formation of the NATO alliance, or international partnership in general, depends on their ready access to the best facts and to the best analysis. That's true inside government, outside of government, or at the core of the Wilson Center's mandate, when policy and academic experts convene to discuss the pressing issues of the day. Staying true to our core beliefs, even and especially at moments of great change, has been the foundation of American greatness for decades, if not for a century or two. I trust that our incoming leaders and our guests with us today and in line will keep that in mind in the days to come. On behalf of all of my colleagues here at the Wilson Center, let me bring today's proceedings to a close with another round of applause in appreciation for Senator Cardin's decades of service and